Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next series of Indo-Pacific podcast. It's Indo-Pacific Optics. Today, we are diving into the U.S.-Vietnam peace-building journey, a testament to how far former foes can come. Since their normalization in 1995, both countries have not only strengthened their diplomatic and political relations, but have also embraced cultural exchanges. Highlighted by the recent comprehensive strategic partnerships and collaboration on people-to-people ties, how did this transformation occur and what does it mean for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region? Let's unpack them in today's episode. So for this discussion, we have war veterans, Vietnam War, Vietnam War veterans, Mr. Jan Barry with us, and he is joining with Mr. James Kurtz. Mr. Barry is a veteran turned poet, artist, and peace activist. His work related to post-war healing will provide us with an insight into the vital role that civic actions, sometimes called citizen diplomacy or people-to-people connections, played in the transformation of the hostility caused by conflicts to economic and governmental cooperation and to peace, establishing the regional stability. Joining him is Mr. James A. Kurtz, who also a Vietnam War veteran. His return to Vietnam and involvement in Veterans Affairs highlight the importance of personal reconciliations and the role of both education and dialogue in bridging societal divisions. His perspectives provide a deep understanding of ongoing impact of war and the pathways towards peace. Without further ado, I would like to invite our consortium's intern, who's been working on this project, Miss Van An. Let's welcome our guest speakers and join us with the engaging conversation. Over to you, Miss Van An.
Yes. Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Van An. I'm currently an intern at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers, and it's my honor to be here with two remarkable individuals who have navigated the tumultuous waters of war and peace during and after the Vietnam War. So hello, Mr. Barry and Mr. Kurtz. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Yeah. Yes, it's 10 p.m. and in Japan already. So good evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us today. So before going into our questions, I would like to ask for a brief sharing and introduction from both of you. I think that the audience is eager to listen a little bit about your educational background or your initial experiences and reflections on the Vietnam War's impact on your life as well as the society surrounding you. So at first, I think, Mr. Kurtz, could we start with you?
Sure.
Yes.
I was born in 1940, which means I was 18 in 1958 when I graduated from high school. And under U.S. law, universities, which are land grants, which are universities that got land from the federal government to sell required 2 years of reserve officer training corps. So I went to the University of Wisconsin, took my 2 years, was convinced that there was really no choice but to be an officer, so I continued with it. And at this time, my high school class, about 90% of them served in the military service. The same high school 10 years later, during the height of the Vietnam War, had less than 5% served. And because we were before the baby boom, there weren't enough people to cover the U.S. military experiences. I went on to law school after graduating, and I had my military commitment, which ran from 1965 through 1967. I went into service on September of 65. I got officer basic training. Then I was a basic training company commander for at Fort Benning, Georgia, which is now Fort Moore, and then was sent to Vietnam and served with the 1st of the Infantry Division. We were stationed in Zion, and basically our experience and area of operation was up towards the Cambodian border, and spent basic all of my time there. Came home to Madison, Wisconsin, which was extremely hostile to Vietnam veterans. It was one of the major places for protests and all of that. And while I was, I had a job where I was advising police behind the police lines on constitutional issues. People were screaming at you, at the cops, calling them protecting baby killers and all of that. And it basically, I understood they were talking about me. And that put me into a shell until the 90s about rejecting the fact that I had had anything to do with Vietnam. And in my view, until our generation is done, the war won't be over. So that's what I have to say about it.
I see. Thank you so much for your sharing. I would say that I think that having an insight on the societal division stemming from the war, from your perspective, is actually very invaluable. So we will dive into that a little bit deeply later on. So thank you so much for your sharing. And I would like to move on to Mr. Barry. So can you please share with us a little bit about your educational background and your experience of the Vietnam War?
Sure. I was born in 1943. And when I graduated from high school in 1961, nobody had ever heard of a war in Vietnam. The next year, 1962, I ended up in Vietnam after I got bored in college and joined the Army. Actually, I wanted to go to West Point, and I thought if I get into the Army, somehow or other, I'll get into West Point. So I was in Vietnam from December of 1962 to October 1963 while we were making the war happen. We were creating a war. And when I ended up at West Point in 1964, I had a lot of questions that couldn't be answered because the military doesn't really talk very much about analyzing things. And so as a cadet at West Point, I decided this was not what I wanted to do. Well, number one, we were lying to the public. The cadets at West Point in 1964 were told that they better pay attention to their training because when they graduated 4 years later, they'd be leading platoons in combat in Vietnam, which was true, except for the public wasn't going to be told about this build-up to a huge war. I decided that I wanted to get out of the Army and write a book about this crazy situation going on in Southeast Asia. And by the time I got out in May of 1965, I had to go back on active duty and finish out my enlistment. The war just kept expanding. I couldn't get a handle on it. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I got so frustrated with trying to write about it and frustrated with what was going on that I decided I better figure out who this peace movement was, see if I could weigh in some way. And I got involved in helping to organize Vietnam veterans in an organization called Vietnam Veterans Against the War to speak about our experiences in Vietnam that the public weren't being told. Many years later, I became a journalist. And again, because I couldn't sit still, that was a good job for me. But I was told in the late 80s by an editor I had to finish a degree to be able to advance in journalism. They had become more professional. So I went back to college and graduated at 49 with a degree in political science, studying the Soviet Union as it was coming apart, which is an amazing period of time in which to study international political science, because nobody predicted what was happening. And since that period of time, I also got involved with other veterans in doing writing and more recently art projects, which are helpful for the individual, but they're also helpful for conveying to the larger public or even our friends and family members things we have a hard time talking about. We can convey it in some kind of, well, as one vet said, I can't talk about it, but I can talk about the art. So if I put it on a piece of art, we can talk about the art. And in that period of time, some veterans starting in the 1980s from the United States started going to Vietnam, trying to build a relationship that wasn't there at the time, but they kept persisting in various projects. One of them has to do with Agent Orange, which became of great assistance to me a couple of years ago when all of a sudden my life fell apart. And it turned out that the Agent Orange poisoning had caught up with me in my late 70s. By that time, enough education had been provided that the VA started to recognize that these diseases are caused by exposure to the contaminant dioxin in Agent Orange. Although I still keep running into veterans who have exactly the same symptoms. I have Parkinsonism, but they have no idea what caused the symptoms that they have in their late 70s. So my take on things is that individuals getting together in groups are the way that we educate each other as to the things that need to be changed, whether it has to do with international relationships or whether it has to do with the things we've done in our own society that really need to be changed. And in many cases, we can compare notes with people in another country, so that in this particular case, Agent Orange is clearly a huge impact in Vietnam. It's been studied far more than the veterans and their family members have been studied in this country. And so I continue in various ways, particularly as a writer, to try to help provide information that people can expand what they know about things, but also expand what can be done about these terrible situations. And then just to summarize, I wrote a book years ago called A Citizen's Guide to Grassroots Campaigns. After I got my degree in political science, I realized there was no textbook about what it is that civic groups do. So I wrote the book, and I included a section about working from the grassroots to the global, doing outreach across international lines. And part of that is, what we're going to be talking about today in terms of in Southeast Asia, but it applies to lots of other places in the world in which people have tried to bridge the tremendous gaps of the time. And we'll come back to that when we have a further discussion. Thank you for having me be part of this program.
Yes, thank you so much for the sharings from both of you. I think that the listeners are very eager to listen to the civic actions, because most of the time we always listen to the diplomatics, the actions from the people in power, but not really about the actions that are actually conducted by the journalists, by the writers, by the poets like you. So I think that it would be a very interesting discussion that we are going to have later on, and we can engage more with the listeners. So yes, let's move on to our first question of the discussion today. So Mr. Kurtz, can we start with you again? So I think that you have mentioned you observed that the Vietnam's war aftermath continues to resonate within the US society, particularly among the veterans, while many in the current generation are more focused on the recent conflicts like the war in Gaza or the war between Russia and Ukraine, without most concentration on the legacies of the Vietnam's war. How do you perceive the younger generation engagement with the Vietnam's war history affecting the reconciliation process between the US and Vietnam?
Well, our school district here in Middleton, Wisconsin had a curriculum which had a block about studying about Vietnam, and for 15 to maybe 20 years, a group of us veterans went in and talked about our various experiences in Vietnam. And we had an Air Force person, a Navy person. I was a platoon leader and a company commander in the Army, so they had me do that. But lo and behold, that is no longer in the curriculum anymore. And in these classes, it was really interesting, the change in the number of students and the diversity. Middleton was a pretty lily white community that I moved into in 1970. And now it's a very, very diverse 25 to 35% of the students were people of color, Asians. And so it's and all of them are extremely interested in the experience. Some of it was kind of the G.I. Joe mentality, and some of it was really interested because they were hearing something about something that impacted them or their families and all of that. And my perception is, at least in this area, is that Vietnam is kind of a non-issue now. Because as Jan said, there was a perception of lying, and there was a lot of untruths that come out of that, and it's started a problem in this country about what is true and what isn't true, and trust of government and all of that. So the Vietnam War did very much to undermine our governance in this country, and this, it directly led to the mess that we were in. And so I think the other thing, that we don't have a draft anymore. Both Jan and I were products of where really you didn't have much of a choice about going into the military when you graduated from high school, because the military was bigger than it was now, and they needed people, and there weren't very many people available. And when you got into the later 60s, a lot of the protests that were fueled on the campuses in at least the Big Ten universities, which are the ones in the middle of the country, was people didn't want to go in the Army and go to war. And when the war ended, they were done with this protesting and stuff like that. And you see with the later wars that we were involved in, virtually no protesting, because nobody had a goal. It was somebody else who was going, and so it's not their problem. So I think what's happened is, and we're going to find out in this presidential election about how much foreign policy plays into the mind of the electorate and the young are going to have a very powerful say in who our next president is. Hopefully, unfortunately, both of the guys are too old, but so that's kind of where I sit on it.
I see. So yeah, thank you so much for your answer. I think that is actually a very important issue for the students to really get, especially the younger generations, to really get to know about the Vietnam War. But for now, as you said, that is no longer the curriculum anymore, which is actually kind of very problematic, because the legacies of the war is still an ongoing issue within the veterans community. So I would like to push it's a little bit further for a question for Mr. Barry, that given your dedication to using the creative arts for healing and dialogue, how do you see the initiatives of like your past and the current work, like writing poems or writing books, helping to connect the younger generations with the experiences of the Vietnam War veterans and contribute to the broader reconciliation process?
In 1971, I worked with a couple of other veterans to create an anthology of poetry by Vietnam veterans. And because we couldn't get a publisher, we published it ourselves. And it came out in 1972. It was called Winning Hearts and Minds. And almost instantly, I got invitations to read this poetry to students of all sorts in high schools and colleges, and even sometimes elementary schools. And the amazing thing to me was, by condensing various experiences in a poem, people could listen to that and absorb that, whereas I'd had the hardest time trying to get people to listen to my prose version of my story about Vietnam. So there's something about poetry, if it's utilized in this particular process, poetry is used to cover all kinds of topics, that people can often really absorb the emotional experience as well as some of the details of a larger experience. And over the years, I've done presentations in a number of different colleges and art museums and other places. Up until very recently, the COVID threw things off for a little while, but that's starting to revive in terms of there being interest in various institutions wanting to have, they have all kinds of other people talking about all kinds of topics, but also to have veterans talking about the experience of being in the military and the consequences. It's the aftermath that usually causes far more disruptions in people's lives. You know, the year or so you spend in the war, you either survive or you don't survive. And then if you survive, you think, oh my God, I survived that. Life is great. And only over some period of time do you realize that this is a problem and that's a problem, and you don't know why you have certain other problems because you can't connect them to the period of time you spent in the war. And just as an example, anger management. I was going to a vet center regarding PTSD and practically having a fight with one of my sons. And I said to the counselor, I said, do you ever have anger management workshops? I said, no, but we'll start one. A whole bunch of other veterans then came to the workshop. I lost track because I have a neurological problem now of what it is that the topic is that we're talking about at the moment. Could you remind me again?
Yeah, that's totally fine. It's okay. I would like to ask, like, how you can utilize the creative art to connect the younger generations who are not very familiar with the Vietnam War experience with the experience of the veterans, because the younger generations, they are not very much
Right.
know about the experience, right? So how can you, and it's very hard to really attract the younger generation because they have so many distractions from the history. So how you can utilize the creative art to attract the concentration of the younger generations towards the Vietnam War experience, especially the veterans community.
The other connection that's been going on is the veterans who went to Iraq and Afghanistan in 2001, 2003, that period of time. Many of them were the sons and daughters of Vietnam veterans who didn't talk a whole lot to each other. And so we've been utilizing our arts and writing programs intergenerationally. And then hopefully, in many cases, family members and friends come to the presentations that we do, and we have a better dialogue in terms of what happened as a Vietnam veteran carried over to a son or a daughter who decided they should go in the military and go to the next war. And we went to Vietnam because our fathers were in World War II, and our fathers went to World War II because their fathers were in World War I. And so we've tried to talk about how do you break this endless cycle of what to me is mindless violence.
I see. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for the sharing from both of you. I think that these kinds of bottom-up approaches are very important, and it needs to work side by side with the top-down approach to actually foster the reconciliation between the two former adversaries after the conflict happens. So
Yeah, Mr.
yes.
Barry, yet I would like to jump in that you rightly mentioned that how to break this endless violence, because war torn apart our culture, our societal relations, emotions, not only the veteran who are the war heroes or the war soldiers, but on the society. They have the scars on the society. So like just you mentioned that building the civic groups, now that now they have the civil society groups where they are working with the grassroots level that you said, the grassroots campaigning. So we can see, maybe we are hopeful to see all these impact on the connecting the civil society, connecting the people, and what the Van and mentioned that younger generation, they have to realize, they have to understand about this war and its consequences, its impact. Okay, go ahead. Van, please go ahead with the next question.
Yes. Thank you so much for your input, Dr. Indu. So yeah, let's move on to our next question. I would like to ask both of you, like, how do you think the reconciliation process between the two countries, which are the US and Vietnam, has influenced the broader Indo-Pacific region? And specifically, can lessons learned from this process inform the peace building and diplomatic strategies in current regional conflicts? So maybe
I was
I
supposed to
would like
start.
to,
Okay.
yes.
One of the things I did after I retired from my law business was I volunteered at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, which has, I found out, the fourth biggest oral history collection in the United States. So this small Wisconsin museum. And I interviewed a large number of Wisconsin Vietnam veterans, and a lot of, it was a very interesting, one group was the Veterans for Peace. There's a very strong Veterans for Peace thing in Madison. But the most interesting thing to get to where is, there are a lot of us veterans that went back to Vietnam. I went back in 2001 and was very welcoming. The country is totally different. Most of the people that were there weren't there when I was there, because that generation is gone. But veterans coming back and giving back to Vietnam for a lot of different reasons. An example is there's this one guy who shot a water buffalo. I think actually he shot two water buffalo when he was in Vietnam. He was in the 1st Cav Division, and he's very, very guilty about that. And he says, I'm going back to Vietnam, and I want to give back. And he had enough money, and he was going to go to this village where the water buffaloes were killed. And the village chief told him, no, we don't need water buffaloes, we need a library. And he launched a project where he was personally responsible for leading a creation of 13 different libraries in Southeast Asia. So that's a pretty dynamic thing. And we in Wisconsin have a large Hmong population, and there's several people that I interviewed that have gotten involved in projects with the Hmong here, and the Hmong have had some problems adjusting here in this country because they were a harvesting society. And in Madison, one of our lakes, we had 4 mute geese that lived one day after the Hmongs moved in because they harvested them. They thought they were supposed to do that, but they've developed a very strong group, and they've done some work going back. The Vietnamese government is fairly hostile to the mountain tribes, as I perceive it, or as I understand it. So it's a little hard to go back there. So, and then we have some Vietnamese students, and I've been involved in meeting with them at the university. Our climate here is, Wisconsin was historically kind of an isolationist place. And so you put that against the people that aren't interested in going to war, it's very difficult to drum up much interest in it. And just one comment about the Iraq veterans, we've had a lot of people that we've in contact with, and I've been very active in the VFW. And there's a huge difference between the generations that fought the war now as opposed to the one Jan and I were involved in, and that's no draft. All of these people are volunteers, and they went in for a lot of different reasons. I mean, economically, going to the military is very attractive now. I mean, I don't remember exactly what I made, but you know, a second lieutenant makes like $40,000 a year now. You know, so I mean, you can make a lot of money in the military, a lot, and so it continues to be a problem of getting our society engaged in thinking about these things. And that's the problem is that we got to figure out our problem, at least from the standpoint of the people I see, before we can do anything seriously foreignly. And maybe the United States not going into any of these foreign countries are good. I mean, every place we've stepped, you know, we've caused problems. I'm going to shut up for a minute.
Okay, Mr. Kurtz, can I ask you something? Like you said that now the military person are getting like more money. So can I ask you how much you were getting when you were in the army, in the military? How much was the salary or pay grade at that time?
My salary, because I got promoted to first lieutenant because you can only be a second lieutenant for 3 years, was $222 a month, and out of that I had to pay for my food and clothes.
Oh.
So it wasn't a lot of money.
Right, right. Okay, let's go to move to the next question. Yeah, that's the kind of thing. I agree with you. We have to understand all these things.
Yes.
I got 60.
So
Sure.
I got $65 a month as a PFC in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wasn't a lot, was it?
Now it's a huge difference. Yeah, we are talking about like now everything has been changed, you know, and yeah, for the weapons to armory to the training to the yeah, of course, salaries and the payment and pay grade.
yes, I think it's very interesting to hear the stories from one of the veterans that wanted to go back to Vietnam to really pay back to the community after the war. And I think it contributed a lot to the reconciliation process between two countries. So I really want to ask Mr. Barry that do you want to add on anything that you may think the influence that the reconciliation between the US and Vietnam may have on the Indo-Pacific region?
Yes. I've been active with Vietnam Veterans Against the War and Veterans for Peace, which have done a number of things in Vietnam. People have gone there to build libraries, to help demine the areas where explosives are still on the ground. And I've participated for a number of years with a group called Teachers for Vietnam, which trained and sent American college graduates to teach conversational English in the universities in Vietnam, many of them which were brand new after the war. Universities were created in places that didn't have universities. And that also educated American students here because there'd be a discussion amongst those people and their friends, but also even the recruiting process to tell people you can do something to help people in another country.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very fascinating. Like so going back and then giving back, paying back to the how that's all like about how the young generation can learn from the going back and paying back. But it's very hard. Like when you fought a war there, and then on the next time you go to establish the relationship. So and that's very important and crucial because after the normalization process in 1995, I guess I would like to ask, and you want to pursue it? Please take the question. That one, next one.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for all of your input. And as you have all mentioned about your educational background, but from what I have researched on your background, you also had some period of times in your lifetime you did careers in the educational aspect as the professor or teachers. So I really want to ask that Mr. Kurtz, what specific initiatives or approaches in education and dialogues do you believe are the most effective in fostering the reconciliation and understanding among the generations who are unfamiliar with the history?
Well, I think it's important to understand that back when we weren't old and doddering, we were kids just like they were, and we had to make choices that they didn't that they did not have to make, and they had to then get to understand that there's some good things that happened out of it, and there were some not so good things about it, and it basically our society, at least where we live, is not a very militaristic society. I mean, basically, back when I was growing up, we used to have a Memorial Day parade, used to have a Veterans Day parade. None of that anymore. I mean, it's just basically, but again, there is a kind of some reconciliation. We built a veterans memorial tribute in Middleton, and we got quite a bit of support from that because with some of the people who were anti-war type not the veterans, but other, they have some feeling of guilt about the way we were treated and stuff like that. And you see there are a lot of students that are somewhat curious about, and I'm familiar with one guy, who's a friend of mine who was a Vietnam veteran. His daughter just took off and took a 3-month trip starting in Singapore and ended up in Hanoi, on her own.
Wow.
Something that we wouldn't even thought about, even and got people with these bicycle things that are going on. I guess you can bike the Ho Chi Minh. I'll say Saigon, you'd say Ho Chi Minh City to Hanoi and stuff like that. I think that those are really some of the strongest things where you can put together something that appeals to them to find out, that Vietnam's an extremely beautiful country. I mean, and the people are really wonderful. Sometimes we weren't wonderful to them, and they weren't wonderful to us. But I've never met a Vietnamese that wasn't a very nice person, in later years. So I think that getting people to do those things that are kind of fun. I question seminar rooms and stuff like that is something like that. You've got to put it into something else that's not, because education can be kind of sterile.
Yeah. As a Vietnamese, I'm very happy to listen to all of your sharing and experience that you have had with Vietnamese. And I hope that other people, other Americans, especially the younger generations, they may have the same experience going to Vietnam and have the same friendly welcoming that you have had when you came to Vietnam as well. So thank you so much, Mr. Kurt. I want to ask whether Mr. Barry, as your background as the college professor, do you want to add anything on this question?
I got involved in college teaching while I was still a journalist because a professor at Rutgers who started in about 1985 had a course about the Vietnam War as well as culture and music. He had 200 students every semester, and he would invite me every time to come and do a presentation. And it convinced me that maybe I possibly, sometimes in the distant future, could teach a college course. I still hadn't finished my undergraduate degree at that point. And eventually, I got pulled into teaching college journalism initially. And then I broadened what I was doing by giving assignments to students that were getting them to think internationally. Well, in New Jersey, students come from all over the world anyhow, and so it wasn't a huge stretch for them to, think about doing this kind of an assignment. And in more recent years, Ramapo College, where I was teaching until I had my health problems, decided that every student should take a course in global sustainability. So I gave them all assignments to take a look at some other part of the world and write about what's going on there. And that, again, helped to broaden their perspective in terms of you don't only have to look at the, I want to call them sterile debates in this country about sustainability, because we have a disinformation campaign on the one side, paid for by the oil and gas companies, to say we don't need to make any changes. On the other hand, people are dealing with all the consequences of not making any changes. And some places else, other places in the world are making some changes. And so this provided students an ability to do the research and then report out to the class what else was going on.
Yeah, that's you raised, Mr. Barry, you raised a very important issue and questions here, like the global sustainability that I read that you worked in the environment too. So while how we can make the sustainable environment and the climate, right, while working with all these innovative stuff, the technology that is helping us, but on the other side, like you mentioned disinformation camp, now we have the AI, and how these are they have their negative impacts as well. So yeah, that's very fascinating. Maybe we will later on we will take this discussion to the further, and in other events too, or the in person or the some other virtual events. Right, Van? We will take this project ahead. Okay, thank you.
Yes,
You're
I
welcome.
think that, yes, actually, both of you have brought a very important aspect of education, that it has a very strong power to shape the younger minds of people. And I think that the approach that you took with the students for the global sustainability course is actually very interesting. Like, you let them explore themselves, the information and also the diverse narratives, so that they can have a better, more comprehensive perspective when it comes to the dialogues with people coming from around the world. So yes, and yeah, I think that we have so far delved into the bottom-up approaches to the post-war reconciliation processes between the Vietnam and the US, as well as touched upon the regional impacts it can have. So, and due to the time limit, to wrap up our insightful discussion today, I would like to invite each of you guys to take turn to share that, looking forward, what are the key areas or issues that need attention to ensure the sustainability of peace building in the post-conflict era? Mr. Kurtz, do you want to go first?
Well, I think that we need to get our house in order here in the United States, because we've just got a mess here that, we're in a situation where, depending on who wins this presidential election, we may become a completely isolationistic country, and, so that there isn't going to be any of that, so basically the private initiatives are the ones that really have the sustainability. And, I'm hopeful that we can, the Vietnamese tourist industry is invaluable. It's a way of getting younger people that want to go. It's a good destination to go to, and all of that. And so basically, we need to figure out what our role should be in the world. And so far, it's always been a military presence because that's where all of the money is put in doing this type of thing. And we need to get into a situation where, one of the big mistakes we made in Vietnam after we went into it, I mean, that was the first mistake, but is to try and tell people how to run their own lives. We have to have some humility to come and say, basically, we have some resources we can help you with. How do you think you want to use them? And not tell them what we wanted, but I mean, to make it clear and to make a deal. Okay, if you don't want to do something that we think is right, we aren't going to give you the money, but we can't be so prescriptive in it. So basically, we've got to be willing and humble to show people what we have. And we've got a tremendous university system that can help people. And, if we could get an active exchange of sending some of our younger people to the universities in Vietnam, it would be very helpful. And that is, it's a people-to-people thing. I just don't think there's going to be a government program that's going to really have any traction.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kurtz. How about you, Mr. Barry?
I agree. I was involved in what I'm going to refer to as a parallel project in the middle 1980s. It was called Reaching Out to the Soviet Union. It was an organization called USSR Bridges for Peace. It was a completely citizens-led organization because the United States government was talking about maybe having a nuclear war with the Soviet Union during the Reagan administration. So all kinds of people throughout society got very concerned and started organizing delegations of people to go to the Soviet Union and meet with people there and invite them to come back to the United States. This was so huge that ultimately the government called it Track 2 diplomacy. We were doing the diplomacy that the government refused to do at the time. And ultimately it changed the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. Why was this important? Because if you change that relationship, then how can you complain about communism in Vietnam? We've done similar things in terms of China as well. We need to revamp that relationship with China. I had a friend who's a Vietnam veteran who went and lived in China in the 80s and 90s to start personally building that relationship that did not yet exist, and discovered all kinds of other people were doing the same thing. And so it's tremendously important that people take initiative. Sometimes they can do it on their own, but I think networking is more effective. And I'm always hopeful in talking to younger people that it gives them ideas in terms of life is boring. Well, you don't have to settle for life being boring. You can do something interesting.
Yeah, this is such a nice that you portray about Vietnam and communism and bridging bridges to peace, right? Yeah, now we see that China is an adversary, and it was in 1980. It was a different, altogether very different scenario. So yeah, that's such a fascinating discussion. We hope that we can continue this in our next episodes and even next events. And do you have something else to remind us?
Yeah, I think that's all the questions that I want to ask in this episode of the podcast. And thank you so much to the two guest speakers for all of your insights and inputs, which were very interesting. I think that we hardly find this kind of information on anywhere on the internet. So it's very an honor for me to be here and listen to both of your perspective as the veterans of the war.
Yes, I agree that it's just original information that we got today, and it's like quite it's not somewhere that you will find in internet or in the knowledge. So that's it will be very helpful to write your article for this. And we are very happy to see you both here, Mr. Kurtz and Mr. We again thank you, again welcome and thanks you for your time and your experience that you shared here. And we look forward to many more events and like having your experience with our interns from the Southeast Asian countries, from the Indo-Pacific countries, how they can learn, how we can take this global sustainability or bridges to peace in moving forward to the relation with the United States to the other countries in Asia. Thank you so much. And we look forward for more discussions.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.